Tuesday felt different from the moment he woke up. Not bad different, just something in the air that made him notice things more. The way sunlight hit the kitchen counter, how his coffee tasted stronger than usual. Even the ride to work seemed to take a new route through familiar streets. He'd been living in the shared apartment for almost 9 months now. It was one of those modern places with an open kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and rent split down the middle. Perfect for 2 people who wanted space but couldn't afford their own place in the city. The arrangement worked well enough. They both kept things clean, paid bills on time, and respected each other's privacy. His roommate was the kind of person who seemed to have everything figured out. She worked at a design studio downtown, always, dressed nicely, and had friends who came over for wine nights that ended with sophisticated conversations about art and travel. He admired that about her, even if they didn't talk much beyond the basics. Work that day dragged on forever. The marketing campaign he'd been working on for weeks finally got approved, but instead of feeling relieved, he just felt tired. His boss kept adding new requirements, his computer crashed twice, and the coffee machine in the break room was broken again. By 5:30, all he wanted was to go home, grab something cold from the fridge, and forget about deadlines for a while. The apartment was quiet when he got back. Her car was in the parking spot next to his, so she was home, but he didn't hear any music or phone calls like usual. He kicked off his work shoes by the door and loosened his tie. The silence felt thick, like the air before a thunderstorm. He grabbed a cold drink from the refrigerator and headed to his room. His space was simple but comfortable. A bed pushed against the wall, a desk where he sometimes worked late, a bookshelf filled with novels he actually read, and a window that looked out at the tree-lined street. Nothing fancy, but it felt like home. The door was usually left open, a few inches. Not wide enough to see in, but enough to hear if someone needed something or if there was an emergency. It was one of those unspoken rules they'd developed over the months of living together. Respectful but available. He changed into comfortable clothes and settled on his bed with a book he'd been trying to finish for weeks. Something about a detective, solving crimes in a small town. Usually he could get lost in stories like that, but tonight his mind kept wandering. Every sound from the rest of the apartment seemed louder than normal. Around 8, he heard her come home from wherever she'd been. The front door opened and closed with its usual soft click. Her keys jingled as she set them on the kitchen counter. The refrigerator opened and closed. Normal evening sounds, but something felt different about the rhythm of them. Her footsteps moved through the apartment differently, too. Usually she went straight to her room to change, then maybe to the kitchen for dinner, then back to her room or the living room to watch something on her laptop. Tonight, the footsteps seemed to wander. Kitchen to living room to hallway, hallway back to kitchen. He tried to focus on his book but found himself reading the same paragraph 3 times. The detective was questioning a witness about something important, but the words kept blurring together. Outside, cars drove by with their headlights cutting through the growing darkness. The streetlight near their building flickered on, casting long shadows across his wall. More footsteps. This time they stopped outside his door for just a moment, before continuing down the hallway. Then they came back, and stopped again. He looked up from his book, listening. Nothing. Just the sound of his own breathing, and the distant hum of traffic. The whole apartment felt charged somehow, like when you know a storm is coming but can't see the clouds yet. That electric feeling in the air that makes your skin more sensitive and your thoughts more scattered. He'd felt it building all week, actually, but couldn't put his finger on what was causing it. Their conversations lately had been different, too. Instead of quick exchanges about groceries or bills, she'd started lingering, asking how his day was and actually waiting for the answer. Making eye contact that lasted a beat longer than necessary. Small things that probably didn't mean anything, but added up to something he couldn't quite name. He set his book aside and stared at the ceiling. The apartment was quiet again, but it was the kind of quiet that feels full rather than empty, like the moment before someone speaks, or the pause between lightning and thunder. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister asking about weekend plans. He started to type back but found himself distracted by every small sound. The building settling, a door opening and closing somewhere upstairs, the soft pad of feet on carpet that could be coming from anywhere. 9 o'clock came and went. Then, 9:30. He realized he'd been holding the same page of his book for 20 minutes without reading a single word. Whatever was different about tonight, whatever had been building all week, felt like it was reaching some kind of peak. The footsteps in the hallway started again, slower this time, more deliberate. They moved from one end of the apartment to the other, then back again. He found himself holding his breath without knowing why. Then they stopped right outside his door, and stayed there. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, could feel the weight of someone standing just beyond his door. The old wooden floors of the apartment usually creaked with every step, but now, there was nothing. Just the feeling of presence, like when you know someone is watching you even when you can't see them. He set his book down carefully, trying not to make any noise. The pages whispered against each other, and even that small sound seemed too loud in the stillness. Outside his window, the world continued as normal. Cars passing by, a dog barking somewhere in the distance, the low hum of the city settling into evening. But inside their apartment, time felt suspended. Then came the softest knock. 3 gentle taps that barely made a sound, but somehow seemed to echo through his entire body. It wasn't the usual knock of someone asking about the electric bill or wondering if he'd seen the mail. This was different, hesitant but determined, like someone gathering courage for something important. "Come in," he said, and his voice sounded strange to his own ears, quieter than usual, but somehow carrying more weight. The door opened slowly. She appeared in the doorway, and immediately he could see that something had changed. Her usual confident posture was gone, replaced by something more vulnerable. Her hands were fidgeting with the hem of her sweater, and her eyes held an intensity he'd never seen before. Not nervous exactly, but like someone standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there looking at him with an expression that seemed to be asking a question he didn't know how to answer. The light from the hallway created a soft glow around her silhouette, making the moment feel almost dreamlike. He found himself holding his breath again. "I need to tell you something," she finally said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the quiet apartment, every word was crystal clear. "I've been thinking about it for weeks, and I can't keep pretending anymore." He sat up straighter on his bed, closing his book completely now. Whatever this conversation was going to be, it deserved his full attention. Her eyes never left his face, and he could see something swimming in them. Not tears, but something deeper. Something that looked like relief mixed with fear. "I know this might sound crazy," she continued, taking a small step into his room. "We've been living here together for months, being polite neighbors, talking about groceries and weather and all these safe topics. But there's something else, isn't there? Something we've both been pretending not to notice." His throat felt dry. He knew exactly what she meant, but hearing her say it out loud made it real in a way that scared and excited him at the same time. All those moments over the past few weeks when their eyes met a little too long. The way she'd started finding reasons to linger in the kitchen when he was making coffee. How he'd catch himself listening for her footsteps, wondering what she was doing in her room. "I feel it too," he said simply. The words came out easier than he expected, like they'd been waiting just below the surface for weeks. She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, something had shifted. The uncertainty was still there, but underneath it was something stronger. Something that looked like decision. "I've been walking past your door for the last hour," she admitted with a small, nervous laugh. "Trying to work up the courage to knock. I probably looked like a crazy person, pacing around out there." He smiled at that, and some of the tension in the room eased slightly. "I wondered what you were doing. I could hear you moving around. I kept telling myself to just go to my room and forget about it, that we have a good thing here, and I shouldn't mess it up by making things complicated." She took another step closer, and now she was fully in his room, the door still open behind her. "But then I realized that pretending is what's really making things complicated." The streetlight outside his window flickered, casting moving shadows across the walls. The whole scene felt like something from a movie, but more real than anything he'd experienced in a long time. His heart was beating so fast he was sure she could hear it. "What are you saying?" he asked, though part of him already knew. She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her making some final calculation in her head, weighing risks and possibilities, fear against desire, the safety of the known against the pull of something new and uncertain. "I'm saying that I don't want to be just roommates anymore," she said. "I'm saying that every time I see you in the kitchen in the morning, or hear you laughing at something on TV, or catch you reading by your window, I wish things were different between us." The air in the room felt electric now, charged with possibility and change. He could feel everything shifting, like tectonic plates moving deep underground. After months of careful distance and polite conversation, they were finally talking about what had been building between them. She reached behind her and quietly closed the door. The sound of the door closing was soft but final, like the click of a lock that couldn't be undone or the last note of a song before silence. She stood with her back to the door for a moment, as if gathering strength from its solid presence. When she turned around, everything about her seemed different, more certain, more herself. He stayed sitting on his bed, not wanting to move too fast or say the wrong thing. This moment felt fragile, like spun glass that could shatter with one careless word or gesture. But it also felt inevitable, like they'd been walking toward this conversation for months without realizing it. "I keep thinking about last Tuesday," she said, moving slowly toward the center of the room. "When you were making breakfast and I came into the kitchen, you were humming something under your breath, and when you saw me, you smiled in this way. That made my whole day better." He remembered that morning. She'd been wearing a yellow sweater that made her eyes look brighter, and her hair was still a little messy from sleep. He'd been making scrambled eggs and wondering if she'd want some, but hadn't found the courage to ask. Instead, they'd talked about the weather and their plans for the week, all while something unspoken hummed in the air between them. "I remember," he said. "You asked if I'd seen your phone charger." "I knew exactly where my charger was," she admitted with a small laugh. "I just wanted an excuse to talk to you for a few more minutes." She was standing near his bookshelf now, running her finger along the spines of his novels. Her touch was gentle, careful, as if she was learning something about him through the books he chose to keep. The gesture felt intimate in a way that made his breath catch. "I've been doing that a lot lately," she continued, "finding excuses, asking if you wanted to share takeout when I ordered too much food, leaving my laptop in the living room so I'd have a reason to be there when you got home from work, pretending to have trouble with the thermostat so you'd come over and help me figure it out." Each confession was like a small revelation. All those moments he'd thought were coincidence or casual neighborliness had been something else entirely. She'd been reaching toward him in the only ways she felt safe to, testing the waters of connection while maintaining the comfortable distance they'd established. "I thought I was imagining it," he said honestly. "The way things felt different between us lately. I kept telling myself I was reading too much into normal interactions." She turned away from the bookshelf to look at him directly. In the soft light of his room, with shadows playing across her face, she looked both familiar and completely new. Like someone he'd known forever and someone he was meeting for the first time. "You weren't imagining it," she said. "Every time we talked, I wanted to say more. Every time you looked at me, I wanted to step closer. But we had this perfect setup, you know? We were good roommates. We never fought about dishes or noise or anything. It felt too risky to mess with that." He understood completely. They'd built something comfortable and safe together, a shared space where both of them could exist without drama or complications. The idea of changing that dynamic, of potentially ruining what they had, would have been terrifying for anyone. "What changed?" he asked. "What made tonight different?" She was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. Outside, he could hear someone walking their dog, the soft jingle of tags and the gentle murmur of a person talking to their pet. Normal evening sounds that reminded him the world was continuing outside this room, even as everything inside it was shifting. "I was in my room earlier trying to read," she said, "but I kept hearing you moving around in here, and I realized I was more interested in what you were doing than in my book. Then I started thinking about how many evenings I'd spent doing that, listening to your life through the walls instead of actually being part of it. She moved closer to his bed, close enough now that he could smell her perfume. Something light and floral that he'd noticed before but never really appreciated. Close enough to see the small freckle near her left ear that he'd never been in a position to observe. I realized I was being a coward, she continued, hiding behind politeness and pretending I didn't want more when I clearly did, and life's too short to spend it wanting things you're too scared to ask for. The honesty in her voice was breathtaking. No games, no hints or suggestions that could be interpreted different ways. Just the truth, laid out simply and completely. It was the kind of courage he'd always admired but rarely seen up close. I want more too, he said. The words came out steady and sure, surprising him with their certainty. I've wanted more for weeks. She smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes and changed her whole face. For the first time since she'd knocked on his door, she looked relaxed, like she'd been holding her breath for a very long time and could finally breathe again. So what do we do now? She asked. He stood up from the bed, closing the distance between them until they were arm's length apart. Close enough to touch, but still maintaining that last bit of space that would give either of them room to change. Their minds, the air between them felt alive with possibility. I don't know, he said honestly, but I know I don't want to go back to pretending we don't feel this. She reached out slowly and took his hand. Her fingers were warm and soft, and the simple contact sent electricity up his arm and straight to his heart. Such a small gesture, but it felt like crossing a bridge they'd been standing in front of for months. Her hand in his felt like the most natural thing in the world, and the most surprising thing at the same time. For months they'd been careful about space, about boundaries, about keeping just enough distance to maintain their comfortable living situation. Now with her fingers intertwined with his, all of that careful distance felt unnecessary and strange. This is nice, she said softly, looking down at their joined hands. I kept wondering what it would feel like. He squeezed her hand gently, and she squeezed back. Such a simple thing, but after weeks of polite conversation and careful space, it felt revolutionary. Like they'd discovered something new that had been there all along, waiting for them to be brave enough to reach for it. I keep thinking this might be a dream, he admitted. That I'll wake up tomorrow and we'll go back to talking about whose turn it is to buy coffee filters. She laughed at that, a real laugh that filled the room and made everything feel lighter. I had the same worry. That's actually why I kept pacing in the hallway earlier. I thought maybe I'd imagined all the signs, all the moments that felt like more than just roommate stuff. The room around them seemed to glow in the soft evening light. His books on the shelves, the rumpled covers on his bed, even the pile of laundry in the corner looked different somehow, like everything had been waiting for this moment to fully come into focus. Can I ask you something? She said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. Anything. That night 2 weeks ago when I made dinner for both of us, when we ended up talking until almost midnight about books and movies and all those random things, did that feel like more than friendship to you? He remembered that night perfectly. She'd made pasta with homemade sauce, and they'd opened a bottle of wine she'd been saving for a special occasion. The conversation had flowed so easily, jumping from topic to topic like they'd been friends for years instead of polite acquaintances sharing an apartment. It felt like a date, he said honestly, but I kept telling myself it was just two people sharing dinner. It was a date, she said with a smile. I mean, I didn't call it that at the time, but that's what I was hoping it would be. I spent 2 hours that afternoon trying to decide what to cook, changing clothes 3 times and practicing casual conversation topics in the mirror. The image of her rehearsing things to talk about made him smile. All evening he'd been impressed by how natural and easy their conversation felt, never knowing she'd been nervous enough to practice. You seemed so relaxed that night, he said. I never would have guessed you were nervous. I was terrified, she admitted, but also excited. It was the first time we'd really talked, just the two of us without any agenda about bills or apartment stuff. I kept thinking how much I liked your laugh, and how you actually listened when I talked about my work instead of just waiting for your turn to speak." They were still standing near his bed, hands linked, but now he found himself studying her face in a way he'd never allowed himself to before. The way her eyes crinkled slightly when she smiled, the small scar near her eyebrow that he'd always wondered about but never felt comfortable asking about, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. "How long have you been thinking about this?" he asked. "About us, I mean." She considered the question carefully, her thumb tracing small circles on the back of his hand. The gentle movement was absent-minded but intimate, like something she'd been doing for years instead of minutes. "Honestly? Since about a month after I moved in," she said. "You were making coffee one morning and you automatically made enough for 2 people. When I came into the kitchen, you just handed me a mug like it was the most natural thing in the world. No big deal, no expecting thanks, just thoughtfulness." He remembered that morning too, though he'd never thought much about it at the time. She'd looked tired, like she'd had a rough night, and it had seemed obvious to make extra coffee. "That's when I started really noticing you," she continued. "Not just as the guy who lived down the hall, but as someone who paid attention to small things, someone who was kind without making a big show of it." The conversation was revealing so many layers to moments he'd thought were insignificant. All those small interactions over the months, all the times he'd wondered if he was reading too much into things, turned out to have been building something real. "I was attracted to you from the beginning," he said, "but I thought you were out of my league. You have your life so together, all those interesting friends, that great job. I figured someone like me wasn't even on your radar." She looked genuinely surprised by this. "Are you kidding? You're exactly the kind of person I was hoping to meet. You read actual books instead of just scrolling through social media. You cook real meals instead of living on takeout. You remember things I tell you about my day." The evening light was fading outside his window, and the streetlights were beginning to flicker on. Soon it would be completely dark, but somehow that felt appropriate. Like they were leaving behind the careful daylight version of their relationship and stepping into something deeper and more honest. "So what happens tomorrow?" she asked. "Do we wake up and pretend this conversation never happened? Do we go back to polite small talk about the weather?" "I hope not," he said immediately. "I can't imagine going backward after this." Morning came slowly, creeping through the curtains in soft golden strips that painted the room in warm light. He woke up before his alarm, which was unusual, but everything about this morning felt different. For a moment, lying in bed, watching dust motes dance in the sunbeams, he wondered if the entire evening had been an elaborate dream. Then he heard her moving around in the kitchen and it all came flooding back. The conversation, her hand in his, the way they'd talked until almost 2 in the morning, sharing stories and hopes and fears they'd never told anyone. The moment when she'd kissed him goodnight, soft and sweet, before going to her own room with promises to figure everything out in the light of day. He lay still for a few minutes, listening to the familiar sounds of morning routine but hearing them differently now. The coffee maker gurgling to life, cabinet doors opening and closing, the soft pad of bare feet on kitchen tiles. Sounds he'd heard hundreds of times before, but now they carried the weight of change, of possibility, of a future that looked completely different from yesterday. When he finally got up and pulled on clothes, he felt nervous in a way he hadn't since high school. What do you say to someone the morning after your entire relationship changes? How do you navigate the space between what was and what might be? He found her at the kitchen counter, already dressed for work, holding a steaming mug of coffee in both hands like it was anchoring her to reality. She looked up when he entered, and her face broke into a smile that was equal parts shy and radiant. "Good morning," she said, and somehow those 2 simple words contained everything. Relief that he was still here, that the night before hadn't scared him away. Joy that they didn't have to go back to pretending. Uncertainty about what came next, but willingness to figure it out together. "Morning," he replied, accepting the mug of coffee she held out to him. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and he felt that same electric connection from the night before. Some things apparently hadn't changed with daylight. They stood in their kitchen, the same kitchen, where they'd had countless polite conversations about groceries and schedules, and everything was different. The air between them hummed with new understanding. The careful distance they'd maintained was gone, replaced by something warmer and more honest. "I was worried you might have second thoughts," she admitted, looking down into her coffee. "That you'd wake up and decide this was all a mistake." "Did you have second thoughts?" he asked. She looked up at him then, meeting his eyes directly. "No, did you?" "Not even for a second." The smile that spread across her face was like sunrise, bright and warming and impossible to look away from. She set down her coffee mug and stepped closer to him, close enough to reach up and straighten his collar in a gesture that was both intimate and casual. "I kept thinking about what you said last night," she said. "About how you've been wanting this for weeks but didn't think I was interested. I wish I'd been braver sooner." "You were brave when it mattered," he said. "That's what counts." Outside their window, the world was waking up to what looked like an ordinary Wednesday. People walking dogs, cars starting up for the morning commute, the familiar rhythm of city life beginning another day. But inside their apartment, two people who'd been careful strangers were learning how to be something more. "I have to leave for work in 20 minutes, she said, glancing at the clock on the microwave. "But I keep not wanting to go. Like if I leave, this might disappear." "It won't disappear," he said with more confidence than he felt. "This is real." She studied his face for a moment, as if memorizing it, then nodded. "You're right. This is real." They finished their coffee together, talking about ordinary things like the weather and their plans for the day, but everything felt extraordinary. Every casual comment carried the undertone of their new connection. Every shared laugh felt like a small celebration. When it was time for her to leave, she hesitated by the front door with her keys in her hand. The morning light streaming through the windows made her hair shine and highlighted the thoughtful expression on her face. "Tonight," she said, "when we both get home from work, let's make dinner together. Actually together this time, not just happening to eat at the same time." "I'd like that," he said. "What should we make?" "Something that takes a while to cook," she said with a grin. "So we have plenty of time to talk." She kissed him goodbye, then quick and sweet but full of promise. A kiss that said this was just the beginning, that there would be more conversations and more moments and more discoveries about each other. After she left, he stood in the quiet apartment for a few minutes, processing everything that had changed. The same furniture, the same walls, the same morning light streaming through the same windows. But it all felt new, charged with possibility. His phone buzzed with a text message. From her. "Already missing our kitchen," it said. "Can't wait to come home tonight." He smiled and typed back, "Home feels different now, in the best way." She responded immediately, "Everything feels different. See you tonight." He got ready for work with a lightness in his step he hadn't felt in months. At the bus stop, waiting for his ride downtown, he found himself looking forward to the end of the day in a way he never had before. Not just because work would be over, but because going home meant seeing her again, talking with her again, learning more about this new version of their life together. The bus arrived, and as he found a seat by the window, he thought about how quickly everything could change. 24 hours ago, he'd been a guy with a perfectly pleasant roommate and a routine that worked well enough. Now he was someone who had plans to make dinner with a woman he was falling for, someone who had found the courage to want more and ask for it. The city rolled by outside the bus window, familiar streets and buildings that looked exactly the same as yesterday. But he was different now, and that changed everything. Tonight, he'd go home to someone who wanted to be there with him, someone who'd chosen to step across the careful line they'd drawn and see what was possible on the other side. It was going to be a good day.